Hello. I suggest you crochet a beautiful and very easy to knit pattern. I will knit this pattern from Angora yarn. In 100 grams, I have 550 meters and a knitting hook of 1 and 5 millimeters. The report of the pattern is 10 air loops. We perform the first loop and tie a chain of air loops, a multiple of 10 air loops. They tied a chain of air loops. This chain should be a multiple of 10 air loops. For the sample, I tied 100 air loops. Then we will link the next row. We perform another +1 air loop. In the first loop we will tie a column without a cape. Then we perform 2 capes on the hook, count the 5th loop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We start the hook in the 5th loop, we will tie a column with 2 capes. Then we perform 4 air loops, 2 capes on the hook. In the same loop we will tie again a column with 2 capes. Then 4 air loops, 2 capes on the hook. In the same loop we will tie the 3rd column with 2 capes. Now we will count the 5th loop along the air chain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in the 5th loop we will tie a column without a cape. This is how the drawing turns out. And we will tie the whole row with this pattern. We tied the whole row to the end, consisting of such arches. This turns out to be the first row of this pattern. Then we will tie the next row of this pattern. The pattern will consist of only 2 rows. We perform 4 air lifting loops to the next row. We turn the knitting to the other side, we perform 1 cape on the hook, we put the hook in a column without a cape, we pull out a long loop. And in this loop of the base we will tie a magnificent column. Once again, 1 cape on the hook, we put the hook in the same column without a cape, pull out a long loop. The 3rd time is a long loop, the 4th time is a long loop. We will tie all the loops with 1 loop. We fix it with air. We perform 4 air loops, then we start the hook under the column of the previous row, we tie the column without a cape, then we perform 4 air loops, 1 cape on the hook and over the column without a cape we tie a lush column. We start the hook, pull out a long loop. The first time, the second time, the 3rd and 4th time. We tie all the loops together, fasten them with air. We perform 4 air loops, we start the hook under the column of the previous row, we tie the column without a cape. And then we also repeat. We perform 4 air loops. We tie a column, a lush column above the column without the cape of the previous row. You can perform 4 long loops or more. They tied a magnificent column. This is how this row turns out. We tied the whole row to the end. This is how this row turns out. Further knitting will continue in exactly the same sequence. These 2 rows will alternate between each other, only the lush columns will be arranged in a staggered sequence. Now here in the middle we will tie a lush column, and here we will tie a column with 2 capes. To make the transition to the next row, we will tie 4 air loops. The first, second, third, and fourth. Turn the knitting over to the other side. The lifting chain replaces the column with 2 capes. Then, according to the drawing, we will tie 4 more air loops, 2 capes on the hook. We will tie a column with 2 capes over the previous lush column. Then, over the column without a cape, we will tie a column without a cape, 2 capes on a hook. Over the lush column we will tie 3 columns with 2 capes. First, the first column with 2 capes, 4 air loops. Then the second column with 2 capes, 4 air loops, and the third column with 2 capes. Above the column without a cape, the column without a cape. I tied the whole row to the end, consisting of such arches. Then we will link the next row. We perform 2 air loops. This will be the transition to the next row. We turn the knitting to the other side. We knit a column without a cape, then 4 air loops, 1 cape on a hook and a column without a cape, which we tied over this column in the middle in the arch. We find a hook in this column without a cape and we knit a lush column into it. We grab the loop, pull out a long loop. The first time, the second time, the third time and the fourth time, a cape and a long loop. Now we will tie all the loops with 1 loop. We fix it with air. It turned out a lush column. Then we perform 4 air loops. We start the hook under the upper column with 2 capes. we tie the column without a cap. So, let's continue knitting. We perform 4 air loops, 1 cape on the hook, we find a column without a cape, which were tied over a column with 2 capes. We start the hook in this column without a cape, grab the loop, tie a lush column. Cape, long loop. Cape, long loop. Now we will tie all the loops with 1 loop. We fix it with air. It turned out a lush column. Next, we perform 4 air loops, a column without a cape over the column of the previous row. Further knitting continues in exactly the same sequence. These 2 rows alternate between each other. And in the row where the lush columns are performed, they alternate with each other in a staggered sequence. In principle, the pattern consists of a simple 2 rows. I've tied up a lot of these rows. I got a sample like this. At first I thought it would be the front side of this pattern. But looking at the inside, I was just stunned. This is how the wrong side of this pattern turns out. Voluminous, relief very, very unusual. Lush columns create a beautiful relief pattern in combination with these airy chains. Look what a beauty it turned out. It's a pity the camera does not transmit the emerald color of the yarn. In combination with the emerald color of the yarn, it looks just very cool, very beautiful. The pattern consists of a simple 2 rows, but so beautifully and effectively it turns out to be a ready-made version. Here is such a grooved volumetric structure. A sweater or a cardigan, for example, with this pattern will look beautiful. That's what the other side looks like. Please write in the comments so that you can tie this pattern. What ideas do you have about applying this pattern? I strongly advise you to try to link the pattern and think about what you would like and with this, where you would like to use this pattern. I thank you for your attention and wish you all the best. Thank you very much for the warm and pleasant words in the comments. Let's knit together.